Hey everyone, it's Michael with Capital City Tree Experts. Over here at Justin's today, taking a look at a tree that he's got. This is one of Justin's indoor trees that he keeps, and he wanted to get it out of this small pot that it's overgrowing and move it into a larger one, and thought it might be a good opportunity to kind of make a video about roots and dig in here and see what we got. So I'm going to start by just kind of pulling out some of this fluff that he's got in here. Just some old branches, that's okay, organic matter, and get down to kind of bare dirt. And with something this small, I think I will just try to go ahead and see if I can get it loose from the soil and pull it out in one clump so that we can take a look at what the roots are doing. Now, obviously when it gets really big, we can't move it around like that by the stem because we're going to disturb roots too much, but since it's still small, we can take a look. I just want to dig some of these back and see if I can kind of find the root flare, and that's where the first roots kind of originate on a tree. Because it's so small, it won't really have a very pronounced root flare like a big tree would. If you can picture a tree in your yard or in the woods that's kind of got a taper to it, that'll lead you right to, that's kind of the first primary roots. But dig down here a little bit. We've got some all these roots are going to be very fine, but trying to find where these all originate from just by shedding away some of this dirt. And just kind of trying to lightly scrub away some of the dirt so we can get a really good look at it. So this is a miniature version of what we do with the air spade. On a big tree, we take the air spade in and blow all the dirt away to expose these roots and see kind of what's going on and make corrections once they're in the ground. But here we have the advantage of doing it when it's small. And I am starting to feel some circling roots that are probably actually likely from when this was in a smaller pot. You can start to see them there. There's one root that's starting to encircle, and obviously that's a problem, and it's not yet a problem, and it wouldn't be for a lot of years, but eventually, as these roots that are circling that you can see here and these stems put on secondary growth, they eventually make contact with each other, and that's how you get something we call a stem girdling root. So either they make contact with the stems or just other roots and cause some issues that way. So you can kind of start to see this is one of the primary roots that's coming out, the root flare, and from the old container it was in, it has about a 90-degree bend in it and turns and wraps around this way. That's often what we see on a larger scale in the trees that are grown in pots at nurseries. So it's pretty common for nursery trees to be grown in a potted system like this, where they level up to larger and larger pots until they're ready to go into somebody's yard. But this is kind of one of the things that we need to watch out for and be really mindful. First of all, if you noticed how much dirt I had to dig through just to get to those first roots. Even on a small tree like this, I was digging through, a couple inches of dirt. And so it's really easy for those roots to get piled on top of when they're in a pot like that. And so on a big tree, if we're thinking, we can get them from the nursery at 2 inches in diameter in a pot, you can imagine how much more soil might be buried over those roots. The other thing, obviously, as I've pointed out, is the circling roots. Well, these were already circling, then it got moved up into the next pot, and then a whole nother kind of couple years of growth of roots went deeper because they had the room, hit the bottom, and then they continued to circle there. So it's here, we can see it in stages. This was one pot, moved into the next pot. A couple years later, those roots grew down into the new space of the pot and totally wrapped around the bottom of that pot. So by the time you level up this tree, this is just going to be an indoor tree, but if this was something that we were potting to grow in your yard and get to that sellable point of, you know, 1.5 inches, 2 inches in diameter, this would have just continued more and more. So you see that on an even bigger scale, it would just be wrapped all the way down. It's not necessarily that this is doomed, because you could plant it in the lawn or in a urban setting, and it could just be really resilient and live a healthy life or a long life. But by giving a tree an ideal start in a system like our legacy tree, where it mimics roots in a natural setting, so they can't go any deeper than 2 deep, and they've kind of got the taper of a tree that's found in nature. You know, you're setting it up for an optimum situation where it can be healthy for a really long time. These are some of those bigger roots that obviously were encircling like that from the smaller pot. So now that I've got some of that more dirt knocked away, which is kind of a never-ending battle, but I want to expose these roots as much as I can. But you can see they're kind of starting to free up, which is nice, because then when we put them in that next pot, we can prune some if need be, or just get them to a point where they're not crossed up like that. So this one clearly has a pretty good bend in it, but fortunately it's still small enough that I can try to kind of pull it through and correct it that way. We just finished up doing a little bit of pruning off camera. Justin was giving me a hand with it. So we took off those extra stems. There was 3 stems there, and want to get those down and eliminated into make sure we got a single stem, which is common to do kind of at this stage or even younger if you were growing a tree like this, is to kind of nip those early to get it to be a single stem. We took off a few roots that were starting to circle, and like I said earlier, some of those ones that were so packed in at the bottom and encircling, once we got rid of that really moist, compact soil, it freed those up. So we can hold on to them and kind of plan there. What we're gonna do is bring in dirt and try to set this so kind of those first major roots, the root collar is at a good level. And as we were pouring soil in, I did kind of work some of those more fibrous roots out with my hand to make sure that they were giving them a little bit of direction. They'll find the space now that they're in a bigger pot, but anything that maybe was circling, kind of tried to correct it a little bit with my hand. So a pretty typical example of what we see in potted trees in our industry. Obviously that was a much smaller scale, but pretty much falls right in line with what we see when we get up to that bigger scale of 1.5 to 2 inch diameter caliper trees that we're putting in, or you're putting in on your properties. And so you know, what we saw with the encircling roots and kind of root boundness is really just exaggerated when you continue growing in a pot and get them up to that size. And those root dysfunctions that we see from a potted plant like that is one of the big reasons why we switched to legacy tree plantings. Kind of a new planting system where the proper depth is always kept for the roots, and those roots are placed in a box in a planting system where they're not allowed to have those kind of encircling issues that we see so much. So thanks for watching today. Hope you enjoyed it and maybe learned something, and keep an eye out for us out there, and watch for our next video.